The grandfather clock's pendulum sliced through the silence, each swing echoing against the mahogany-paneled walls. William Sterling stood at the window, watching snowflakes spiral down through the amber glow of street lamps. His reflection stared back, jaw tight, shoulders rigid beneath his tailored suit. The fire behind him cast dancing shadows across ancient leather-bound volumes that lined the walls, texts passed down through generations of alphas before him. He pressed his palm against the cold glass, feeling the barrier between his heated skin and the brutal winter night. The contrast reminded him of the divide between those inside the Sterling territory and those without. His territory, his responsibility. The scent of burning applewood mingled with aged bourbon as William lifted the crystal tumbler to his lips. The liquid burned a familiar path down his throat, warming him from within even as his thoughts grew colder. Reports had been coming in all week. Rogues crossing boundaries, desperate for shelter, for blood, for anything to survive the harshest winter the city had seen in decades. William's enhanced hearing caught the sound of footsteps long before the knock came. 3 sharp raps, Lydia's signature. He didn't turn when the heavy door swung open. "You're brooding again," his sister said, her heels clicking against hardwood as she approached. "The council members are starting to talk." "Let them talk." William's breath fogged the glass. They're warm, fed, and secure in their positions. They have that luxury. Lydia appeared beside him, her reflection joining his in the window. Where his features were sharp angles and severity, hers carried the same sterling intensity, wrapped in diplomatic grace. "Thorne called an emergency session for tomorrow." She lowered her voice, though they were alone. "He's pushing for stricter enforcement at the borders. 0 tolerance for rogues, even those with children." William's fingers tightened around the glass. He would see them starve or freeze before offering a drop of assistance. It's not just Thorne. The others fear what happened in the Western Territories. Rogues turning feral, attacking clan members. Lydia's reflection showed concern etched across her features. They're afraid. Fear makes for poor policy. William finally turned from the window, the firelight now illuminating the silver threads in his dark hair. The Sterling clan has always maintained order through strength tempered with mercy, not cruelty. The grandfather clock struck midnight, each chime reverberating through William's chest like a warning. "I'll handle Thorne," he said, setting down his empty glass. "For now, double the patrols, but with clear instructions. Any rogues found are to be brought to me directly. No exceptions." Lydia nodded, knowing better than to argue when her brother used that tone. As she turned to leave, William's phone vibrated on his desk. The screen illuminated with a security alert from the clinic, their blood bank storage facility. His muscles tensed, instinct sharpening his senses. "It seems I won't be waiting until tomorrow to deal with our rogue situation." The sterile scent of antiseptic couldn't mask the metallic tang of stored blood that permeated the clinic's supply room. William moved silently through the darkened hallway, his footsteps making no sound on the polished floor. 2 guards flanked him, their postures stiff with deference to their alpha. Through the small window in the supply room door, William caught movement. A slender figure in tattered clothes hurriedly stuffing blood bags into a worn backpack. His enhanced vision cut through the dimness, taking in details the security cameras had missed. A woman, thin to the point of gauntness. Dark hair falling in unwashed strands around a face that might once have been beautiful before desperation carved its lines. William held up his hand, stopping the guards from bursting in. Something about her movements spoke of more than simple theft. The way she checked the labels, selecting specific blood types, the trembling in her hands that suggested not just fear, but physical weakness. "Sir," one guard whispered, hand hovering over his weapon. "Wait," William commanded, voice barely audible. Inside, the woman froze, head tilting slightly. Even in her weakened state, she'd sensed them. Her heart rate spiked. William could hear it thundering from where he stood. She whirled toward the door, eyes widening as they met his through the glass. For a moment, neither moved. William saw the calculation in her gaze, the desperate assessment of escape routes. Then she lunged for the window at the far end of the room. "Now," William said, pushing the door open. The woman moved with surprising speed, but malnutrition had taken its toll. She stumbled, the backpack slipping from her grasp. Blood bags spilled across the floor, their red contents gleaming under the emergency lights. "Please," she gasped, backing against the wall. "I need these, not for me." "Silence, rogue," the first guard snapped, advancing with his weapon drawn. "Theft of clan resources is punishable by my judgment," William interrupted, stepping between them. The air in the room shifted, molecules rearranging themselves in recognition of the Alpha's authority. "And I haven't rendered it yet." He approached the woman slowly, noting how she pressed herself against the wall, chin lifted in defiance despite the fear radiating from her in waves. Up close, the evidence of her suffering was unmistakable. The hollow cheeks, the cracked lips, the way her clothes hung from a frame that had once been stronger. "What's your name?" William asked, keeping his voice neutral. She swallowed, her throat working visibly. "Elizabeth," she finally answered. "Elizabeth Vance." "And who are the blood bags for, Elizabeth Vance? You said not for yourself." A flash of surprise crossed her features. Surprise that he'd been listening, that he cared to ask. "My sons," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "Twins. They're 7. We've been on the move since their father was killed 3 territories over. They're getting weaker. The synthetic blood isn't enough anymore. They need the real thing to develop properly." William studied her face, searching for deception and finding only raw maternal desperation. His own mother had died protecting him when he was young. He recognized the look of a parent willing to risk everything. "The penalty for stealing from the Sterling clan is severe," he said, aware of the guards listening. Protocol demanded certain appearances be maintained. "I know what your laws say," Elizabeth replied, a flicker of defiance strengthening her voice. "But what would you do if it were your children starving, your family freezing? Would you respect property lines drawn on maps while they suffered?" The guard behind William shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, Councilman Thorne has been clear about the new zero-tolerance policy for rogues. He'll expect—" "I'm well aware of what Thorne expects," William cut him off, never taking his eyes from Elizabeth. "But this is still my territory, and I decide how our laws are applied." Elizabeth's gaze darted to the scattered blood bags, her concern for her unseen children palpable in the air between them. "Where are they now? Your sons?" William asked. Hesitation crossed her face, the instinctive protection of a mother unwilling to reveal her children's location to a potential threat. "Somewhere safe," she answered carefully. "As safe as we can manage. But they won't last another night without proper nutrition. Their bodies are starting to shut down." William felt the weight of his position press down on him. Clan law was clear, the council's directive even clearer. But the woman before him represented everything his father had taught him about leadership. That true strength lay in protecting the vulnerable, not punishing them for their vulnerability. He made his decision. "Pick up the blood bags," he instructed her, then turned to the guards. "Call Dr. Aris. Tell her to prepare the examination room." Elizabeth stiffened, misunderstanding his intentions. "I won't leave my children." "You won't have to," William assured her, his tone softening slightly. "But I need to know they're receiving proper care, not just emergency rations. Where are they?" The standoff stretched between them, taut with mistrust. From the hallway, the sound of multiple footsteps approached, more guards responding to the security alert. William could sense Elizabeth's increasing panic as her chances of escape dwindled. "Elizabeth," he said, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I'm offering help, but you need to trust me now. There's no other way out of this room." The door burst open. 3 more guards entered, followed by Councilman Thorne himself, his tall frame imposing in the doorway. His cold eyes took in the scene, the spilled blood bags, the ragged rogue, the alpha standing too close to her. "What's this?" Thorne demanded, his cultured voice dripping with disdain. A thief caught in the act, it seems. His gaze raked over Elizabeth with clinical disgust. "And bringing disease into our territory, no doubt. These rogues carry all manner of contagions." William felt Elizabeth trembling beside him, though whether from fear or rage, he couldn't tell. "I've handled the situation, Thorne," William said evenly. "Your presence isn't required." "With respect, Alpha," Thorne replied, the honorific sounding hollow in his mouth. "The council voted this morning on stricter protocols. Any rogue caught stealing clan resources is to be executed immediately as an example. The vote was unanimous." "I wasn't present at this vote," William noted, his voice dangerously soft. "An emergency session. We tried to reach you." Thorne's thin smile suggested no such attempt had been made. "The law's clear. She must be executed at dawn." Elizabeth's heartbeat thundered in William's ears. He could smell the acrid tang of her fear mixing with the antiseptic air. Behind Thorne, more guards had gathered, watching the confrontation between Alpha and Councilman with wary eyes. William knew the politics at play. Thorne had been undermining his authority for months, positioning himself as the stronger alternative. This confrontation was as much about William's leadership as it was about one desperate mother. "The law," William said slowly, "has always granted the Alpha final judgment in all matters within Sterling territory." He turned to face Thorne fully, drawing himself up to his full height. "Or are you challenging that as well?" The air between them crackled with tension. Thorne's jaw tightened, but he knew better than to issue a direct challenge. "Not yet. Not here." "Of course not," Thorne conceded with false deference. "But the council will expect you to uphold our unanimous decision. The example must be set." William felt every eye in the room on him. This moment would define his leadership in ways that would ripple through the clan. He made his choice. In one fluid motion, William removed his heavy cloak, the royal blue garment lined with silver thread that marked him as Alpha. Before anyone could react, he placed it around Elizabeth's shoulders, the heavy fabric enveloping her thin frame. A collective gasp filled the room. The royal cloak was more than clothing. It was a symbol of protection, of claiming. No one under the Alpha's cloak could be touched, harmed, or judged by any but the Alpha himself. "This woman and her children are under my protection," William announced. his voice resonating with power that seemed to vibrate through the walls themselves. "Any action against them will be considered an action against me." Thorne's face contorted, with barely suppressed rage. The guards stood frozen, caught between clan law and council directive. Elizabeth stood wrapped in the Alpha's cloak, her eyes wide with disbelief as the heavy mantle of his protection settled around her shoulders, silencing every threat in the room. Thorne's fingers curled into fists at his sides, knuckles whitening as he stared at William with undisguised contempt. The council chamber had fallen so silent that William could hear the soft whimpers of the twins as they pressed closer to their mother beneath the heavy folds of his cloak. "You overstep, Sterling," Thorne finally said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying through the chamber like a knife. "The Alpha's protection is meant for clan members, not strays." William maintained his position between Elizabeth and the council members, feeling the weight of tradition and prejudice pressing against his decision like a physical force. The clan elders exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from shock to outright disapproval. "The Alpha's protection," William replied evenly, "is mine to give as I see fit. Or do you presume to dictate the limits of my authority now, Councilman?" A muscle twitched in Thorne's jaw. Behind him, Lydia had risen from her seat, her face a careful mask that revealed nothing of her thoughts. Only William knew his sister well enough to recognize the slight narrowing of her eyes, a warning. "This meeting is adjourned," William announced, turning slightly toward Elizabeth without taking his eyes off Thorne. "Mrs. Vance and her children will be escorted to my estate. Any concerns can be addressed at tomorrow's council session." The guards who had been poised to remove Elizabeth now stood uncertain, caught between conflicting chains of command. William gave a sharp nod to his personal security detail, who had been stationed at the rear of the chamber. They moved forward immediately, forming a protective formation around Elizabeth and the twins. "This isn't over," Thorne murmured as William passed him. "It never is with you," William replied, just as quietly. The Sterling estate sprawled across 30 acres of woodland at the edge of the territory, its stone walls and wrought iron gates a physical manifestation of the boundary between the clan and the outside world. As the SUV carrying William, Elizabeth, and her sons passed through the gates, William noticed how Elizabeth's shoulders finally relaxed slightly, though her hands remained protectively curled around her sons. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice barely audible over the crunch of gravel beneath the vehicle's tires. "They'll come after you for this." William gazed out the window at the ancient oaks lining the driveway, their branches swaying in the autumn wind. "They've been looking for reasons to come after me since I took leadership." He turned to look at her directly. "This just gives them a more convenient excuse." The twins, Jayden and Mason, watched him with identical expressions of wary curiosity. They couldn't be more than 7 years old, William guessed, though malnutrition had likely stunted their growth. Their eyes, however, held an awareness that seemed far older than their years. "Are we prisoners here?" Jayden asked suddenly, his small voice surprisingly steady. William shook his head. "No. You're guests." "What's the difference?" Mason countered, and William couldn't help but smile at the child's perceptiveness. "Prisoners can't leave. Guests choose to stay." The vehicle rolled to a stop before the main entrance, a 3-story stone facade with tall windows that gleamed in the late afternoon light. "And I hope you'll choose to stay, at least until we figure out a better solution." Elizabeth clutched the edges of his cloak tighter around herself. She hadn't removed it since he'd placed it on her shoulders, as if afraid that without it, the protection it symbolized might vanish. Why are you doing this? You don't know us. William considered her question as they were escorted inside, the massive oak doors opening to reveal a grand foyer with a sweeping staircase. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished marble floors. He noticed how Elizabeth and her sons instinctively huddled closer together, overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding them. "Let's get you settled first," he said, nodding to his housekeeper, who had appeared silently in the doorway. "Mrs. Winters will show you to your rooms. There are fresh clothes waiting, and dinner will be served in an hour." Elizabeth hesitated, still clutching the twins to her sides. "You didn't answer my question." William met her gaze directly. "Because what Thorne and the council are doing is wrong. Because those boys deserve a chance." He paused, then added more quietly, "And because I've seen how rogues are treated in other territories. I won't have that happening here. Not while I'm alpha." Something flickered in Elizabeth's eyes. Not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. She nodded once, then allowed Mrs. Winters to guide her and the twins up the staircase. Lydia emerged from the shadows of the library as soon as they were out of sight. "That was quite a performance, brother," she said, arms crossed over her chest. "Thorne is already calling for an emergency council meeting." William loosened his tie, suddenly feeling the weight of the day pressing down on him. "Let him. He doesn't have the votes to challenge me directly." "Not yet," Lydia corrected, following him into his study. The room smelled of leather-bound books and the faint trace of whiskey. She closed the door behind them with a soft click. "But this gives him ammunition. Taking in rogues. A female and cubs, no less. People will talk." "Let them talk." William poured 2 fingers of scotch into a crystal tumbler, the amber liquid catching the light from the fireplace. "What would you have me do, Lydia? Turn them out? You saw those boys." Lydia's expression softened slightly. "I saw them, and I saw how you looked at her." William stiffened. "This isn't about that." "Isn't it?" She moved closer, lowering her voice though they were alone. "William, I know you. I know that look. It's the same one you had when you found that injured wolf in the Northern Territory 3 winters ago. You can't save everyone." "I'm not trying to save everyone." The scotch burned pleasantly as it slid down his throat. "Just them." Lydia sighed, reaching for the decanter to pour her own drink. "The council will demand to know why they're special. Why her?" William turned to stare into the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker against the blackened stone. "Did you see their eyes, Lydia?" She paused, glass halfway to her lips. "What about them?" "The twins." Their eyes changed color when the guards approached them in the chamber. Just for a moment, he turned back to face his sister. "They're showing signs of dual nature, both of them." Lydia nearly dropped her glass. "That's impossible. Rogues haven't produced dual-natured offspring in generations. The genetic line is too diluted. Apparently not in their case." William moved to his desk, pulling out a leather-bound volume from the bottom drawer, one of the oldest clan records in their possession. "Which makes me wonder about their lineage, about her." "Thorne will demand testing," Lydia warned. "If he suspects, which is precisely why they're here and not in the pack quarters." William closed the book with a thud. "I need time, Lydia. Time to figure out who she really is, and why her sons carry such strong bloodlines." Lydia studied him for a long moment. "Be careful, William. Thorne has been looking for a reason to challenge you since Father died. If he can prove you're harboring powerful rogues without council approval, I know the risks." William drained his glass. That's why I need you to run interference with the council. Buy me time. His sister nodded slowly. 3 days. That's the best I can do. It'll have to be enough. Dinner was a quiet affair. Elizabeth and the twins had been provided with clean clothes, simple but well-made items that fit surprisingly well. William noted how different she looked with her dark hair freshly washed and falling in waves around her shoulders, the hollowness of her cheeks less pronounced after a proper meal. The twins ate ravenously, but with unexpected manners, carefully using their utensils and murmuring quiet thank yous to the staff. Elizabeth barely touched her food, her eyes constantly scanning the room, assessing exits, watching her sons with vigilant attention. They're safe here, William said quietly, noticing her tension. No one will harm them on my property. Elizabeth set down her fork. For now. But what happens when your council overrules you? When they force your hand? The twins glanced up at their mother's words, their identical expressions alert and wary. William noticed how they seemed to communicate without speaking, subtle glances and minute gestures forming a silent language between them. The Alpha cannot be overruled, William replied, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. Even an Alpha's power had limits, boundaries established by centuries of tradition and pack law. Every power has its breaking point, Elizabeth said softly. I've seen Alphas fall before. William studied her across the table. You speak as though you've lived among packs before. Something flickered across her face. Caution, perhaps fear. We've moved around a lot. Through multiple territories? William pressed gently. That's unusual for rogues. Most stick to unclaimed lands, avoid pack confrontation. Elizabeth's hand moved instinctively to rest on Jayden's shoulder. We do what we must to survive. The conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Winters entering with dessert, warm apple tart with vanilla ice cream. The twins' eyes widened at the sight, momentarily distracted from the tension between the adults. Perhaps we should continue this discussion after the boys are settled for the night, William suggested, noting how Elizabeth's posture had stiffened defensively. She nodded once, her relief evident as the focus shifted away from her past. Later, after the twins had been tucked into bed in a guest suite adjacent to Elizabeth's room, William found her standing on the balcony outside the library, still wrapped in his cloak despite the warmth of the house. The moon hung heavy and full in the sky, bathing the gardens below in silver light. They've never had their own beds before, she said, without turning as he approached. They were so excited they could barely fall asleep. William stood beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. Children adapt quickly. Too quickly sometimes. Her voice carried a weight of experience that belied her years. They've had to. Elizabeth, he began carefully, I need to know more about you, about the twins, if I'm going to protect you effectively. She turned to face him then, her features half illuminated by moonlight, half hidden in shadow. Why would you want to? You're risking everything, your position, your clan's respect, for strangers. Not strangers, William corrected. Members of my territory who needed help. We're rogues, she reminded him bitterly. Barely considered wolves at all by most packs. William leaned against the stone balustrade. Is that what you believe? That being a rogue makes you less? It's what I've been told my entire life. Her fingers tightened on the railing. What my sons have been told. And yet your sons show signs of dual nature. William watched her carefully, noting how she stiffened at his words. That's extraordinarily rare, especially in children born to rogues. Elizabeth's breathing quickened, slightly. You noticed. It would be difficult not to. Their eyes shifted when they felt threatened in the council chamber. William turned to face her fully. Elizabeth, dual nature doesn't manifest in diluted bloodlines. It requires strong heritage on both sides. She remained silent, her gaze fixed on the moonlit gardens below. Their father, William ventured carefully. He wasn't a rogue, was he? The silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft rustling of leaves in the night breeze. Finally, Elizabeth spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. He was a pack wolf, high-ranking. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the railing. It wasn't what you think. We loved each other. But his alpha forbade the union. William felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Which pack? Elizabeth finally met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. The Northern Ridge pack. William couldn't hide his shock. Thorne's former pack, before he joined our council. She nodded once, a sharp, pained movement. Thorne was the Alpha's enforcer. He's the one who carried out our sentence when they discovered our relationship. He's the one who... Her voice broke, and she turned away, shoulders trembling beneath his cloak. William fought the urge to reach for her, to offer comfort that might not be welcome. What happened? They killed him, she said flatly. Made me watch. Then they cast me out, pregnant and alone. They would have killed me too, but... She swallowed hard. But killing a pregnant female, even a rogue, was too much even for them. So they marked me instead and banished me. William's fists clenched involuntarily. Marked you? Slowly, Elizabeth pulled aside the collar of her borrowed shirt, revealing an ugly scar at the base of her neck. 3 parallel lines, deliberately carved to identify her as an outcast, forbidden from seeking shelter in any Allied territory. Thorne did this personally, she said, letting the fabric fall back into place. And now he's found us again. He recognized me today in the council chamber. He knows who the twins are. The sons of a high-ranking wolf from his former pack, William murmured, the pieces falling into place. Dual-natured, potential threats to his narrative about rogue inferiority. Elizabeth turned to him, her expression fierce despite the fear evident in her eyes. He'll never stop hunting us. Not until we're dead or gone far from here. Or until he no longer has the power to threaten you, William countered. She gave a bitter laugh. He's a councilman. His power is secure. Not as secure as he believes. William stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of the soap she'd used, lavender and vanilla. Elizabeth, I need you to trust me. Let me help you and your sons. Why? She demanded, her voice breaking. Why would you risk everything for us? William hesitated, searching for the right words. Because I've watched Thorne and wolves like him twist our traditions into weapons against those they deem unworthy. Because your sons deserve to know their heritage, to develop their gifts without fear. He paused, then added more softly, and because no one should have to run forever. Elizabeth studied him in the moonlight, searching his face for deception. The council won't let this stand. They'll come for us. For you. Let them come, William said, his voice hardening with resolve. I am still Alpha here. The moment was interrupted by a small voice from the doorway. Mom? They both turned to find Jayden standing there in borrowed pajamas too large for his small frame, his dark hair tousled from sleep. What is it, sweetheart? Elizabeth moved immediately to her son's side, kneeling to his level. Mason's having the dream again, Jayden whispered, his eyes flicking nervously to William. The bad one. Elizabeth's face paled. I'll come right away. She glanced back at William. I have to go. William nodded. We'll continue this tomorrow. As Elizabeth hurried away with Jayden, William remained on the balcony, staring up at the full moon. Something about the twins' connection, their dual nature, nagged at his memory. An old legend from the clan histories, something his father had mentioned years ago. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to find them. Dr. Aris's cottage sat at the edge of the Sterling property, surrounded by herb gardens and ancient oak trees. Despite the late hour, lights still burned in the windows as William approached. The clan doctor had served 3 generations of alphas, his knowledge of wolf lore and medicine unparalleled in the territory. The old man opened the door before William could knock, as if he'd been expecting him. I wondered when you'd come, he said, stepping aside to allow William entry. The cottage smelled of dried herbs and old books, a comforting scent that reminded William of his childhood visits. News travels fast, William observed, following Dr. Aris into his cluttered study. Especially news of an alpha draping his cloak over a rogue female, the doctor replied, his weathered face creasing with a knowing smile. Tea? William nodded, watching as the old man's gnarled hands prepared 2 cups with practiced efficiency. I need information, Aris, about dual-natured twins. The doctor's hands stilled momentarily. So the rumors are true then. The boys show signs. You've heard already? One of your guards mentioned unusual eye shifts during the confrontation. Aris handed William a steaming cup. Sit, Alpha. This conversation requires comfort. William settled into an ancient armchair as Aris lowered himself into its twin across from him. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across the book-lined walls. Dual-natured twins are exceedingly rare, Aris began, sipping his tea. Even among pure bloodlines, for them to appear in rogues. Their father was Pack, William interjected, high-ranking from Northern Ridge. Aris's bushy eyebrows rose. Ah, that explains much, but not everything. He set his cup down carefully. William, there's something specific about twins with dual nature. Something from the old histories. That's why I'm here. I remembered my father mentioning something, but the details escape me. The old doctor rose slowly, moving to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room. From it, he withdrew a leather-bound volume so old the binding had cracked in places, the pages yellowed with age. He handled it reverently as he returned to his seat. The Book of Ascensions, Aris explained, carefully opening the fragile tome. It records all significant power shifts within the major packs for the last 4 centuries. His gnarled finger traced down a page of faded script. Here, the prophecy of divided blood. William leaned forward as Aris began to read aloud. When the moon witnesses the birth of mirror souls with divided blood, a great shifting of power shall follow. The twins of mixed lineage shall herald either the strengthening of the old ways or their destruction. Their fate rests upon the choice of the Alpha who shelters them. Aris closed the book gently. There's more, but that's the essence. Dual-natured twins born of mixed blood, Pack and Rogue, are considered omens of change. William sat back, processing the information. And Thorne knows this. If he doesn't, someone on the council certainly does. Aris's expression grew grave. William, These boys represent more than just unusual genetics. To traditionalists like Thorne, they represent a threat to the established order, living proof that rogues carry power in their bloodlines, which undermines everything Thorne has built his political platform on, William murmured. No wonder he's so determined to eliminate them. It's more than politics, Aris warned. There are those who believe such twins should be separated, or worse, to prevent the prophecy from manifesting. William's jaw tightened. That won't happen. Not while I'm alpha. Then you've made your choice, Aris observed quietly. The prophecy speaks of the alpha who shelters them determining their fate, and by extension, the fate of our traditions. I don't believe in prophecies, Aris. The old doctor smiled faintly. Perhaps not, but others do. And that makes these children dangerous indeed, not because of what they are, but because of what they represent. William rose, his decision crystallizing. I need to get them out of the territory, somewhere Thorne can't reach them. You think he'll let them simply walk away now that he's found them? Aris shook his head slowly. William, the moment you placed your cloak around that woman's shoulders, you tied your fate to theirs. There is no separating them from you now, not in the eyes of the pack. The truth of the doctor's words settled heavily on William's shoulders as he stared into the dying embers of the fire. Then I'll have to face whatever comes. Not alone, I hope, Aris said, rising to see him out. You'll need allies, William. True ones. I know. William paused at the door, the night air cool against his face. Thank you, old friend. Be careful, Aris cautioned. Thorne has been waiting for this opportunity. He won't waste it. William nodded once before disappearing into the darkness, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. He needed to move quickly now, before Thorne could mobilize the council against him. Dawn was just breaking when William returned to the main house, the sky lightening from black to deep indigo above the eastern hills. He'd spent hours in the old tunnels beneath the property, checking escape routes and security measures established generations ago during less peaceful times. He found Elizabeth in the kitchen, alone, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee as she stared out the window at the awakening day. She'd abandoned his cloak, he noticed, now dressed in simple jeans and a sweater provided by his staff. You didn't sleep, she observed without turning. Neither did you, he countered, pouring himself coffee from the pot she'd made. Mason's nightmares kept us up. She finally turned to face him, dark circles beneath her eyes. They're getting worse, more vivid. William leaned against the counter. What does he dream about? Elizabeth hesitated, then sighed. Hunters, men with silver weapons, chasing us through the woods. Sometimes they catch us, sometimes we escape. But they're always there, always hunting. She set her mug down with a soft clink. Jayden feels them too, though he doesn't dream them. That's how they are, connected, sharing experiences even when apart. That's part of their gift, William said quietly. The twin bond amplifies their dual nature. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. You've been researching us. I've been trying to understand why Thorne wants your sons dead, William corrected gently. And I think I know now. He explained what he'd learned from Dr. Aris, the prophecy, the significance of dual-natured twins born of mixed blood, the potential threat they posed to traditionalists like Thorne. Elizabeth listened in silence, her face growing paler with each word. When he finished, she pressed a hand to her mouth. So it's not just revenge, it's fear. Fear disguised as righteousness, William agreed. The most dangerous kind. What do we do? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to fully address. Before William could answer, the security system chimed softly, alerting them to approaching vehicles. William moved quickly to the monitoring panel hidden behind a kitchen cabinet door, his expression hardening as he viewed the camera feeds. "Council vehicles," he said tersely. "3 of them. Thorne is leading them." Elizabeth was already moving, heading for the stairs. "I'll get the boys." William caught her arm gently. "Wait. Running now will only confirm their suspicions." He met her frightened gaze steadily. "Trust me. I have a plan." The uncertainty in her eyes cut him deeply, but he couldn't blame her. Trust had never been rewarded in her experience. "What kind of plan?" she asked. "One that uses their own laws against them." William released her arm. "Go to the boys. Keep them calm. I'll handle this." Elizabeth hesitated, then nodded once before hurrying upstairs. William straightened his shoulders, composing his features into the mask of authority he'd perfected over years of leadership. By the time the doorbell rang, he was ready. Lydia arrived through the side entrance just as William reached the foyer, her expression grim. "I couldn't stop them," she said quietly. "Thorne called an emergency session at dawn. They voted to inspect the property." "On what grounds?" William demanded, though he already knew. "Harboring dangerous rogues," Lydia replied. "William, they're claiming the boys showed signs of feral regression during the council meeting. They're calling them unstable, a threat to pack safety." The doorbell rang again, more insistently. William exchanged a look with his sister. "Stay close to me. Whatever happens, follow my lead." Mrs. Winters appeared from the hallway, looking anxiously toward the door. William nodded to her. "Let them in." The heavy door swung open to reveal Thorne standing at the head of a delegation of 6 council members and 4 security officers. His thin smile didn't reach his cold eyes as he took in William's composed stance. "Alpha Sterling," Thorne greeted with false cordiality. "The council requests immediate access to your property to assess the rogue situation." "Councilman," William replied evenly. "You seem to have forgotten protocol. Council inspections require 24 hours notice except in cases of imminent threat." Thorne's smile widened fractionally. "Which is precisely what we have determined exists. The council has classified the rogue female and her offspring as Category 1 threats based on yesterday's display of unstable shifting." William maintained his calm exterior despite the anger building within him. "Interesting classification for 2 7-year-old boys who were frightened by armed guards. Their age makes them more dangerous, not less," Thorne countered. "Untrained shifters with emotional instability pose the highest risk to our community." He extended a document bearing the council seal. "Our inspection authorization, signed by the required 2/3 majority." William took the paper without looking at it. "And if I refuse?" The atmosphere tensed immediately, the security officers shifting their stances subtly. Thorne's expression hardened. "Then you would be in direct violation of the Charter of Territories, Section 8, which requires all alphas to comply with council security directives." Thorne's voice carried just enough volume to ensure everyone present heard clearly. "Such a violation would necessitate an immediate vote of no confidence." William felt Lydia stiffen beside him. They both knew what that meant. A challenge, possibly a forced succession, if enough council members aligned against him. It was the moment Thorne had been orchestrating since William's father died. "Very well," William said after a calculated pause. "You may inspect the main house only. My private quarters and secure areas remain off-limits as per Alpha privilege. Thorne's momentary flash of disappointment confirmed William's suspicion. He'd hoped for an outright refusal, a chance to force the challenge immediately. "The Council accepts these terms," Thorne replied smoothly. "We'll begin immediately." William stepped aside, allowing the delegation to enter. As they moved past him into the foyer, he caught Thorne's arm, speaking low enough that only the councilman could hear. "I know what you're doing, Thorne. I know why you want those boys." Thorne's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Do you? Then you understand why they cannot remain here. Why she cannot remain." "I understand that you're afraid," William replied, releasing his arm. "And fear makes men dangerous." "Not as dangerous as prophecy," Thorne murmured, his gaze flicking toward the staircase where Elizabeth now stood with the twins, their small hands clutched tightly in hers. The council members fanned out through the main floor, while the security officers positioned themselves strategically near exits. William moved to stand beside Elizabeth and the boys, a clear statement of protection that wasn't lost on anyone present. "Mrs. Vance," Thorne acknowledged with cold formality. "How convenient to find you still here." "Where else would I be?" Elizabeth replied, her voice steadier than William had expected. "The Alpha has offered us sanctuary." "Temporary accommodation," Thorne corrected, his gaze sliding to the twins who stared back at him with identical expressions of wary recognition. "The council has concerns about your son's condition." "Their condition?" Elizabeth echoed, her grip tightening on the boys' hands. "They're children." "They're unstable shifters," Thorne countered. "Witnesses report involuntary eye shifts and partial transformations during yesterday's proceedings." William stepped forward. "They were frightened children responding to a threat. Hardly unusual behavior for young wolves." "For pack wolves, perhaps," Thorne conceded. "But these are rogues with unknown lineage and clearly unstable control. The council has a responsibility to assess the risk they pose." One of the security officers approached, holding out a small device that William recognized with a surge of anger, a genetic scanner used to forcibly assess bloodlines without consent. "You will not test these children without their mother's permission," William stated flatly. "Council Directive 17B authorizes non-invasive testing of all non-clan wolves residing on pack territory," Thorne recited smoothly. "No permission is required." Elizabeth pulled the twins behind her, backing toward the stairs. "Stay away from my sons." The tension in the room escalated instantly. The security officers moved forward as the council members watched with varying expressions of concern and anticipation. William placed himself between Elizabeth and the approaching officers. "Stand down," he ordered, his voice carrying the full weight of his alpha authority. "This is still my territory." "Not if you obstruct a lawful council directive," Thorne replied. "Officers, proceed with testing." What happened next occurred so quickly that later accounts would differ on the precise sequence. As the officers advanced, Mason, the quieter of the twins, suddenly cried out, his eyes flashing from brown to brilliant gold. Jayden's followed suit immediately, as if responding to his brother's distress. A ripple of energy seemed to pulse through the room, causing the crystal chandelier above to sway slightly. "Containment protocols!" Thorne shouted, reaching inside his jacket. William moved without thinking, his protective instincts overriding everything else. In one fluid motion, he removed his cloak, not the ceremonial one from yesterday, but his personal alpha cloak of deep charcoal gray, and threw it around all three of them, Elizabeth and both boys, pulling them against him as the security officers rushed forward. "Enough!" William's roar reverberated through the house with supernatural force, stopping everyone in their tracks. The windows vibrated with the power behind his command, dust drifting down from the ceiling moldings. In the sudden silence that followed, William's voice was deadly calm. "You have inspected the property as requested. You have seen the rogues with your own eyes. Now you will leave my home." Thorne's face had contorted with barely controlled rage. "This isn't over, Sterling. The council will vote. The council will do nothing until the next full session." Lydia interjected smoothly, stepping forward with a document of her own. "As council secretary, I must remind you that emergency powers extend only to inspection, not action. Any vote requires quorum and proper notice." Thorne snatched the paper from her hands, scanning it quickly. His jaw worked as he struggled to maintain his composure. 3 days, he finally said. "The council will reconvene in 3 days for a formal vote on this matter." His cold gaze fixed on William. "I suggest you use that time wisely, Alpha." The threat hung in the air between them as Thorne signaled his delegation to withdraw. As they filed out, William maintained his protective stance, the cloak still wrapped around Elizabeth and her sons who remained pressed against him, their small bodies trembling. When the door finally closed behind the last council member, William felt Elizabeth sag against him, her forehead resting momentarily against his chest before she straightened, pulling back slightly but still within the circle of his cloak. 3 days, she whispered. "What happens in 3 days?" William met her gaze steadily. "In 3 days, they'll try to take your sons." "And you?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "What will you do?" Before William could answer, the security system blared again, this time with the high-pitched tone indicating a perimeter breach. Lydia rushed to the monitoring panel, her face paling as she viewed the feed. "Council enforcers," she reported tersely. "At least a dozen breaking through the north gate. They're armed, William." "They can't do this," Elizabeth gasped. "You said we had 3 days." "Thorne never intended to wait," William replied grimly, already moving them toward the rear of the house. "The inspection was just to confirm your location." The distant sound of breaking glass echoed from somewhere in the east wing. William exchanged a quick look with Lydia, who nodded once before disappearing down a side hallway. "What's happening?" Jayden asked, his small voice tight with fear. William knelt quickly before the twins, meeting their frightened gazes. "Remember what I told you about guests and prisoners? Right now, we need to make sure you stay guests. That means we need to move quickly and quietly. Can you do that?" Both boys nodded solemnly as Elizabeth clutched them closer. "This way," William said, leading them toward what appeared to be a solid wall. He pressed his palm against a section of paneling, revealing a hidden passage beyond. "The tunnels will lead us to safety." As they slipped into the darkness of the secret passage, the sounds of the enforcers breaching the main house grew louder behind them. William sealed the entrance just as flashlight beams swept across the room they'd vacated. The tunnel closed with a soft click that seemed to seal their fate. William took the lead, producing a small penlight from his pocket that cast just enough illumination to navigate the narrow passage. The earthen walls pressed in around them, cool and damp against William's fingertips as he guided them forward. "This network runs beneath the entire estate," he whispered. "My grandfather built it during the Purge Wars. Stay close." Elizabeth clutched the twins' hands, her knuckles white with tension. Mason stumbled on the uneven ground, and William instinctively reached back to steady him. "How far do these go?" Elizabeth asked, her voice barely audible over their footsteps. All the way to the old boathouse at the lake's edge. There's a vehicle there. William paused at a junction, listening intently before choosing the right-hand path. Lydia will create a diversion to buy us time. The thought of his sister facing Thorne's enforcers alone sent a cold spike of fear through his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. The twins were watching him closely, measuring their own fear against his reaction. They'd traveled perhaps 200 yards when the first tremor shook the tunnel. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and Jayden let out a small whimper. "What was that?" Elizabeth pulled the boys closer. "Lydia," William answered grimly. "She's triggered the security protocols." Another tremor, stronger this time, vibrated through the earth. "What does that mean?" Elizabeth demanded. "It means she's destroying parts of the house to slow them down." William increased their pace. "The east wing has likely been collapsed. The sacrifice of his ancestral home, centuries of sterling history reduced to rubble, should have devastated him. Instead, William felt only a cold clarity as he led the small family deeper into the darkness. Possessions could be rebuilt. Lives could not. The tunnel widened as they approached an underground chamber. William's light revealed a small arsenal mounted on the walls. Weapons, communication devices, survival gear. "We need to move quickly," he said, grabbing a backpack and filling it with essentials. "Thorne will have men at all the standard exit points." "Why is he doing this?" Elizabeth asked, helping the twins into warmer clothes from a storage trunk. "You said we had 3 days." "Because he fears what you represent." William handed her a small but powerful flashlight. "Your boys are the first documented case of twins surviving the change in over a century. It challenges everything the Council has taught about genetic purity." "But they're weak," she protested. "They're alive," William countered, checking a small tablet that displayed the estate's security feeds. Most were offline, but one showed enforcers methodically searching the main house. "And that's enough to terrify men like Thorne." William's phone vibrated, a text from Lydia. "North exit compromised. Take the water route. We'll meet at rendezvous B." "Change of plans," he announced, grabbing a waterproof duffel. "We're going through the lake tunnel." Elizabeth's face paled. "The boys can't swim well." "There's a boat," William assured her, though he didn't mention it was little more than a small raft. "But we need to hurry." They continued through a narrower passage that sloped gradually downward. The air grew colder, damper, carrying the mineral scent of the lake. The twins moved admirably, following instructions without complaint, despite the fear evident in their eyes. When they reached the underground dock, William's heart sank. The small platform extended into black water that disappeared into a low tunnel, but the raft was missing. "Someone's been here," he said quietly, examining the cut rope that should have secured the vessel. Elizabeth's breathing quickened. "What now?" William made a quick calculation. "The water's not deep here. Chest high on me, probably. Shoulder height on you. We'll have to wade through." "And the boys?" "I'll carry them." William knelt before the twins. "One at a time. Mason first, then I'll come back for Jayden." "No," Elizabeth said firmly. "We stay together." William started to argue but recognized the steel in her voice. It was the same resolve that had kept her and her sons alive against impossible odds. "I'll take Mason," he conceded. "You take Jayden. The tunnel's only about 30 yards long." They stripped off their outer layers, securing them in the waterproof bag. William lifted Mason onto his shoulders, feeling the boy's slight weight and the tremor that ran through his small frame. "Hold tight to my head," William instructed, "and keep your face up if the ceiling gets low." Elizabeth did the same with Jayden, her face set with determination. The water was shockingly cold as they entered, stealing William's breath. He heard Elizabeth's sharp intake behind him, but no complaint. Mason's fingers tightened in his hair as they moved deeper, the water rising to William's chest. "You're doing great," William encouraged, reaching back to steady Elizabeth as the uneven lake bottom threatened her footing. Almost halfway, a distant boom echoed through the tunnel, followed by the unmistakable sound of rushing water. "They've breached the main water gate," William realized with horror. "Move, now!" They pushed forward frantically as the water level began to rise. The ceiling lowered until there was barely a foot of clearance above the water's surface. "Heads down, boys," William called, ducking lower as the tunnel constricted further. Mason pressed himself flat against William's head as the space between water and stone narrowed to inches. William tilted his chin up, keeping his mouth above water while using one hand to guide them along the ceiling. Elizabeth struggled behind him, shorter and fighting harder to keep Jayden dry. William reached back blindly, finding her shoulder and pulling her forward. Almost there, he gasped as his fingers found a ridge in the stone ahead. The exit. With a final surge of effort, they pushed through into the open water of the lake. The night air felt warm compared to the tunnel as William lifted Mason higher, swimming one-armed toward the boathouse silhouette 30 yards away. They reached the small dock as the sound of engines growled in the distance. Flashlight beams swept the shoreline, searching. "Inside," William directed, helping Elizabeth and Jayden onto the wooden planks. The boathouse was little more than a shell, but it contained what they needed: an unmarked SUV with tinted windows. The boys shivered violently as Elizabeth toweled them dry with blankets from the emergency kit. William checked the vehicle, keys in place, tank full, as Lydia had promised. "We need to go," he said, helping them into the back seat. "Thorne will have the main roads blocked soon." As if summoned by his words, headlights appeared on the access road leading to the boathouse. William swore under his breath, sliding behind the wheel and starting the engine. "Get down," he ordered as he killed the lights and eased the vehicle out the rear door of the boathouse, which opened directly onto a narrow service road. They'd made it perhaps half a mile when the radio crackled to life. "William," Thorne's voice filled the car, smug and satisfied. "You disappoint me." Elizabeth stiffened in the back seat, pulling the twins closer. "How did he?" she began. "The council has override access to all PAC communication systems," William explained grimly, reaching to shut off the radio. "I wouldn't do that," Thorne continued. "Not if you want to know about the blockade waiting at the county line, or about your sister." William's hand froze above the dial. "What about my sister?" "She's been taken into custody for treason against the council. The penalty, as you know, is severe." The threat hung in the air like poison. William's fingers tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. "What do you want, Thorne?" "What I've always wanted. Order, compliance. The natural hierarchy preserved." Thorne's voice hardened. "Bring the woman and her abominations to the gathering stone. Come alone. Surrender them properly, and your sister walks free." The radio went silent. "You can't," Elizabeth whispered from the back seat, her voice breaking. "You can't give up the boys." William didn't answer immediately, his mind racing through options, each more desperate than the last. The gathering stone was the ceremonial center of PAC territory, a place of judgment and execution in the darker days of their history. "I won't," he finally said, turning the vehicle onto a dirt track that cut through the dense forest surrounding his property. "But we can't outrun them forever." "Then what?" "We change the rules." William pulled the SUV to a stop in a small clearing and turned to face her. "Thorne's power comes from tradition and fear. We need to take both away from him." "How?" "By making everything public." William reached for his phone. "The council operates in shadows. They control our kind through isolation and misinformation. But there are others. Alphas from neighboring territories who've questioned Thorne's leadership. If I can reach them—" He dialed quickly, speaking in rapid, urgent tones to someone named Marcus. When he hung up, his expression was grim but determined. "We're going to the Gathering Stone," he announced, "but not to surrender." "That's suicide," Elizabeth protested. "It's our only chance to save Lydia and secure your freedom." William's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. "Do you trust me?" The question hung between them, weighted with everything unspoken. Elizabeth looked down at her sons, then back to William. "Yes," she said simply. The Gathering Stone stood in a natural amphitheater, a massive granite boulder split down the middle by some ancient force. Floodlights had been set up around the perimeter, turning night to harsh day. At least 20 enforcers formed a ring around the clearing, with Thorne at the center, Lydia kneeling before him with her hands bound. William parked at the edge of the tree line. "Stay here until I call for you." "William," Elizabeth caught his arm. "Be careful." He covered her hand with his own for a brief moment, then stepped out into the light. The enforcers tensed as he approached, hands moving to weapons. Thorne smiled, a predator's expression devoid of warmth. "Wise decision, Alpha Sterling," he called. "Where are they?" "Safe," William replied, continuing his steady advance until he stood 10 yards from Thorne. "Release my sister first." Thorne laughed. "You're hardly in a position to make demands." "Aren't I?" William raised his voice, projecting to the entire gathering. "I, William Sterling, Alpha of the Northern Territories, invoke the right of challenge." A murmur ran through the assembled enforcers. Thorne's smile faltered. "There is no challenge," he snapped. "This is a council matter." When a council member threatens the family of an alpha on his own territory, it becomes a matter of pack law. William removed his jacket, letting it fall to the ground. "Or are you afraid to face me without your men, Councilman?" Thorne's face darkened with rage. "You would risk everything for these genetic mistakes?" "I would risk everything for justice." William's voice carried across the clearing. "Those boys survived against every prediction your eugenics program made. They disproved the very foundation of your authority." "They are weak," Thorne snarled. "They will weaken us all." "Strength takes many forms," William countered. "Not all of them are measured in muscle and claw." Thorne's control snapped. With a roar, he lunged forward, shifting as he moved. His human form blurred, replaced by 200 pounds of muscle and fury. William barely had time to brace before the impact sent them both crashing to the ground. Pain exploded across William's chest as Thorne's claws raked downward. He rolled, narrowly avoiding the snapping jaws that sought his throat. Unlike Thorne, William didn't shift immediately, using his human form's greater agility to create distance. "Is this how the council enforces its will now?" William called out, circling warily. "Through ambush and coercion!" Thorne charged again. This time William was ready, sidestepping at the last moment to deliver a punishing blow to the larger wolf's ribcage. Bone cracked audibly. "You hide behind tradition while breaking our most sacred laws," William continued, his voice carrying to the enforcers and beyond, to where he knew others were watching. "You preach strength while fearing anything different." Thorne recovered, more cautious now as they circled each other. Blood matted the fur on his side. "The council protects our future," Thorne growled, his words distorted through his wolf's muzzle. "The council protects its power," William corrected, "even at the cost of innocent lives." William finally allowed his own shift, the transformation rippling through him like fire. Where Thorne's wolf was massive and dark, William's form emerged leaner, silver-gray, built for speed rather than raw power. They clashed again in a blur of teeth and claws. William felt skin tear as Thorne's jaws clamped onto his shoulder, but he twisted within the grip, using Thorne's greater weight against him to throw the larger wolf off balance. They separated, both bleeding now. William's shoulder burned with each movement, but he kept his stance steady, watching for the next attack. "Elizabeth," he called without taking his eyes from Thorne. "Bring the boys." A hush fell over the clearing as Elizabeth emerged from the tree line, a twin on each side. They walked slowly but proudly, heads high despite their fear. "Look at them," William commanded the gathered witnesses. "Look at these children you would condemn for the crime of being different." Thorne used the distraction to attack again, driving William backward toward the gathering stone. They crashed against it. William pinned beneath the larger wolf's weight. Teeth snapped inches from his throat as he fought to keep Thorne's jaws at bay. "The old ways are dying, Thorne," William gasped, feeling his strength ebbing. "You can't stop what's coming." With a desperate surge, William drove his knee upward, creating just enough space to slip from Thorne's grasp. He rolled away, coming up in a defensive crouch as headlights suddenly illuminated the clearing from all sides. Car doors slammed as figures emerged from the darkness. Alphas from neighboring territories, each accompanied by their seconds and guards. Marcus, the Eastern Alpha, stepped forward first. "What is the meaning of this, Thorne?" he demanded. "An unsanctioned execution on Sterling territory?" Thorne hesitated, suddenly aware of the witnesses. William seized the moment, addressing the gathered Alphas. "Councilman Thorne ordered the capture and likely execution of 2 children, he announced, gesturing toward the twins. Their crime? Surviving the change despite not fitting his ideal genetic profile. "The council determines who is worthy," Thorne began. "The council serves the pack," Marcus interrupted. "Not the other way around." William shifted back to human form, ignoring the pain of his wounds as he walked to Elizabeth and the twins. He placed himself deliberately between them and Thorne. "These boys and their mother are under my protection," he declared. "Any action against them is an action against me." "You would defy the council for them?" Thorne demanded, also returning to human form, though he remained crouched and ready. William reached up and removed the silver alpha medallion from around his neck, the symbol of his position and authority within the council structure. "If the council stands for persecution rather than protection," he said clearly, "then I want no part of it." He dropped the medallion to the ground between them. The gesture sent shockwaves through the assembled witnesses. An alpha renouncing his council connection was unprecedented. "You're throwing away centuries of sterling influence," Thorne warned. "I'm choosing what matters." William turned to the other alphas. "For too long, We've allowed fear to guide our policies. We cull our own young if they don't meet arbitrary standards of strength. We hide in enclaves separate from the world. And for what? We're dying anyway, becoming fewer each generation. Marcus stepped forward. What are you proposing, Sterling? A new council, new leadership, new priorities. William's gaze swept the gathering, starting with an end to the culling. Treason! Thorne snarled, lunging forward. This time, it wasn't William who intercepted him. 3 of the enforcers moved as one, restraining their own leader. Stand down, Councilman, the lead enforcer said firmly. This has gone far enough. Lydia, still kneeling with bound hands, caught William's eye and nodded slightly. He understood immediately. She had been working on the enforcers during her captivity, reminding them of their true duty to all pack members, not just the council. Release my sister, William ordered, and this time the enforcers complied without hesitation. Lydia rose gracefully, rubbing her wrists as she crossed to join William's group. She squeezed his arm briefly before kneeling to check on the twins. This isn't over, Sterling, Thorne warned, as the enforcers maintained their hold on him. No, William agreed. It's just beginning. The aftermath unfolded over hours that stretched into dawn. The Alphas convened an emergency session right there at the Gathering Stone, with Thorne under guard. William's wounds were treated by Dr. Aris, who had arrived with Marcus, while Elizabeth and the twins rested in one of the vehicles. By sunrise, the council had been temporarily dissolved pending a full gathering of all territory leaders. Thorne was removed from power, held accountable for multiple violations of pack law. The ancient stone that had witnessed so many judgments now bore witness to the beginning of change. William found Elizabeth and the boys as the first light broke over the trees. They sat together in the back of the SUV, the twins finally sleeping against their mother's sides. What happens now? Elizabeth asked quietly, as William slid into the seat beside her. Now we rebuild, he answered. Not just structures, but systems. And us, my boys? William looked at the sleeping twins, their faces peaceful for the first time since he'd met them. You're free to go wherever you choose, he said carefully. The council can no longer threaten you. Elizabeth studied his face. And if we choose to stay? Something unfurled in William's chest. A warmth he'd nearly forgotten was possible. Then we figure it out together, he said simply. He reached out hesitantly, his hand hovering over Jayden's head. Elizabeth nodded, and William gently stroked the boy's hair. Jayden stirred slightly, instinctively leaning into the touch without waking. They'll need special training, William continued softly. Their strength may develop differently, but it will come, and they'll have advantages we don't yet understand. They have something to live for now, Elizabeth whispered. Someone willing to fight for them. The rising sun cast long shadows across the clearing as they sat together. The makeshift family formed in crisis. William's estate lay in partial ruins behind them, his position as Alpha transformed, the future uncertain. Yet as Mason shifted in his sleep, reaching out to grasp William's finger with surprising strength, William felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of survival, but the steadier hope of possibility. Outside, the morning birds began their chorus, singing of territory and belonging. William listened, his acute hearing picking out each distinct voice in the symphony. Once, he had heard only noise. Now he recognized the complex communication, the community hidden within the chaos. Listen, he said quietly to Elizabeth, as the twins stirred toward wakefulness. That's what we've been missing all along. The world was changing, and for the first time in generations, they would change with it.